Making decisions and balancing the pros and cons of behavior change may require some intervention from the coach. Try to drive the process by motivating your client with a technique called motivational interviewing. This would involve using questions like, why is it that you would like to change this behavior? Or, why shouldn't you try to change this behavior at this time? In an effort to uncover potential barriers, you may also want to ask the client, what would it take for you to change this behavior? Notice that these are all open-ended questions. If coaching intervention is required for the decisional balance process, approach this task with 3 points in mind: cultivating motivators, recognizing and understanding barriers, and then strategizing solutions. These are all ways that the coach can facilitate behavior change by overcoming cognitive barriers from the client. Change efforts for your client will be a lot more likely if they are able to see themselves as effective. When a client demonstrates sufficient levels of self-efficacy, they reach a point where they believe that they can initiate and sustain behavior changes. The circular relationship between your client's beliefs and actions is expressed in their self-efficacy. In other words, the more your client believes that they can make changes for themselves, the more likely they are to be able to do it. So in this way, beliefs fuel action, and this is a powerful measure of success for the client to experience because it in turn increases their self-efficacy. Your client's stage of readiness also parallels their feelings of self-efficacy. It would be inappropriate to expect your client to be effective at a behavior goal if they were not in the proper stage of readiness, and this could severely and negatively impact their feelings of how effective they can be about making changes in unwanted behaviors, not only now, but looking ahead. In the classic sense, behavior change through positive and negative reinforcement is known as operant conditioning, and this reinforcement strategy can be useful for clients in that it allows for direct consequences of certain behaviors, both good and bad. Although it's always preferred to change behaviors before negative consequences occur, a client who presents with negative thinking is going to be more likely to fall into a negative cycle if behaviors and consequences are not matched accordingly. This is why it's important to reward positive behavior changes. The best way to coach a client to understand behavior and consequences is to create goals that are manageable for the client so that they can feel confident about staying on track. We've talked a little bit about listening skills and what to listen for from your client. Now everyone, including your client, will engage in what we call self-talk. But this can be problematic if your client is experiencing challenges or the difficulties tied to behavior change. Remember that a client can be coached to use change talk in either a negative or positive manner. When you hear negative thinking expressed from your client in their words, you may need to consider that the client is in a pre-contemplative stage with regard to a specific behavior. To be able to coach and intervene with the client in this scenario, try eliciting change talk from the client. Change talk is a way to encourage the client to say those things that they know within their minds already. This is drawn from the client by doing motivational interviewing and asking questions that make the client think about change. When this is done repeatedly, clients might begin to believe that change is more likely. Without really knowing it, your clients are looking for you to establish connections. Now, we've mentioned this before, but specifically they're looking for you to connect the positive core, their strengths, attitudes, values, and resources for learning and growth. One important strategy to remember is that reassuring clients in the early stages about the potential for lapses will help clients to build self-confidence and self-efficacy. In early stages, be reassuring clients that these lapses are okay. It's not really necessary to mention the trans-theoretical model or stages of readiness to the client, but it's important for you to be aware of the likelihood that lapses are more common in the beginning or early stages of behavior change. Another characteristic of early stages of readiness include confidence levels that are typically low. If at all possible, encourage the client to accept any reluctance or ambivalence within their mindset. Again, providing clients with the belief that this is okay to feel this way or that it's normal is an indirect way to help the client build their confidence. Our clients don't like for us to view them as having failed at a behavior change effort, and some will even take this to the extreme by expressing guilt using statements like, "If I had only listened," or "Maybe if I had done what I knew I should, this may not have happened." But this is actually another form of negative talk and thinking. So try to redirect the client to look more for internal motivations, because this sort of guilt typically has an external source. Motivation has to be solid from within your client. When statements are made that reveal wavering levels of motivation, it's best to seek clarity from the client by asking once again, why do you really want to make this change? And if your client eventually learns to take control and responsibility for their own wellness, the process of change should be considered a breakthrough, because it shows that the client has connected with their own motivations, whether they are internal or external. Effective coaching strategies require a great deal of thought and planning on the coach's part. But once this is done and out of the way, you can then focus more on evaluating and reassessing your client. Does your client show progress in steps toward positive behavior changes, or have they regressed to an earlier stage? Dialogue with your client expressed during dynamic interactions will reveal levels of commitment and the client's connections to the process. If your client shows that they're not making progress towards goals or changes after 30 days, first reevaluate their goals. If the client's goals seem realistic, you may need to reevaluate the client's level of commitment to the process of behavior change. You may find the core coaching competencies provided in your manual to be useful as a template to help your client manage change.